Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another session of Financial Transformation Live. And I think this is officially the first session after we've won the awards, the Gen CFO Awards, which we're super, super excited about. And it was a genuine honor to be nominated for. But if you haven't been to one of our sessions, well, where have you been? But definitely welcome and thanks for joining us. So this session today is all about designing your finance systems architecture. And it's about understanding what are the different components that make up an impactful finance systems architecture. I spend a lot of time working with customers to help them build this out. And I've seen some interesting approaches to it over the years. So I just want to talk through how I like to approach things as a consultant and some of the things that I think about. But I also think it's important to understand the how do you get there and when is the right time to put these things into play. So before we get, let's just catch up with where we're at and make sure I don't skip ahead. So today's session is about talking about what are the options for how you build out a finance systems architecture and system strategy, how you can layer that and some of the components you may need to think about. I will give you an example of layers and types of solutions. Not some of them we work with and we implement ourselves. Some of them are ones we've come across. So I am trying to keep this fairly open. But as usual, as you probably know by now, my background and my passion is for working with Sage technology. So there is the odd mention of Sage as we go through. So for those of you that haven't joined one of these sessions before, my name is Hannah Monroe. I am Managing Director and Transformation Lead here at ITAS. We've got quite a few awards, which we're very, very proud of, and recently won recently won and been nominated for awards with the Gen CFO and the Digital Finance Function Awards as well, which is very, very exciting. But fundamentally, we are a financial transformation partner that specializes in Sage technologies. But I like to make these sessions as broad as possible to help people gain the knowledge and apply that knowledge in their own systems, whether they're using Sage or not. So don't worry if you're not using Sage. This session is still applicable, and the principles and the frameworks I talk about are applicable to any system regardless. Okay, so as usual, if you're joining us live, please do say hello. It's lovely to see people commenting and engaging with what we're talking about. If you have thoughts or questions, you can pop it in the chat. And it's lovely to see those conversations coming through. So please do say hello. Thanks, Sophie, for starting us off. But again, guys, if you're joining us live, please do give us a little wave and let us know one thing you'd like to get out of today's session. Because even if it's not in my plan, I will do my best to incorporate it into the conversations as we go through. Okay, so just a reminder, our last session was on 12 months to a faster close. So how do you approach building out your 12-month plan to get your month end closed as fast as you can? And welcome, Kimberly. Thank you so much for joining us live, and great to hear that you've joined us on the podcast. And for anyone that is joining us either live or listening to this on the podcast afterwards, do remember that we also have the videos on YouTube as well. So if you'd like to see some of the slides as well as listen to it, then you are more than welcome. So okay, so what system strategy approach, and what I'm going to talk first about what strategies there are available. So there tends to be two kinds of categories of system approaches that I see. So the first one is what I call the traditional ERP, and I don't use traditional in a negative connotation. I always like to say that, but it's very much about an all-in-one solution where you get everything within that product, and all of the capabilities that you might need there's a module for it. So that's option one. So that's what we call ERP, and that's probably where a lot of people's experience is, because that has been the strategy for I think the last 10 years. Now, what we are seeing and what we're working with is a second approach as well, which is what we call best of breed. So that's where you have a core finance and analytics capability very often in your core finance piece, but then you add in additional capabilities. So that might be AP or, purchasing capabilities. That may be AR or billing capabilities that you're pulling in. And again, it's all about, it's not that one is better than the other. And I'm going to talk you through the pros and cons, but they're the kind of two system strategy approaches that I see. Now, I do see the occasional hybrid as well, where people have taken an ERP and then added some of the best of breed approach, pulled in one element that they particularly need a deeper level of capability in, but tying that into their traditional ERP. But I do believe that this is a fundamental question that you should ask yourself before you go and choose any system, is understanding, like, what is our strategy as a business towards this? And I will give you some questions to ask yourself so that it helps you decide which approach you want to take. But fundamentally, you need to think about the approach that you want to take to systems and what is going to work best for you as a business. Okay. So let's just talk about the pros and cons. So your suite or your traditional ERP. So some of the real big benefits of it is everything's in one system. It tends to have a shared interface. Users tend to get access to all of the capabilities subject to permissions. And I say this is that the other thing I would say and heavily caveat is that just make sure that's true. So I have seen providers that and have worked with providers that will say it's part of the solution, but it's actually a separate module, right? So just be careful when you're working with providers to make sure that you know what you're getting versus something that's on their price list versus being a true part of their suite. Generally, they integrate well. So normally, because they've got a shared database and they're in the same system, it integrates well across the different modules. And so you don't have to think about your data strategy. Generally, it tends to be better value for money because you get everything in one package. So you pay for everything, but you get everything. So it tends to be quite good value when, if you looked at buying all of the capabilities separately. And generally, not always, you tend to have less providers and contract relationships to manage, right? So that's the pros of the suite or traditional ERP approach. I guess the cons on the flip side is that because that company owns the suite, they tend to split their development capacity across multiple modules and capabilities. So whereas if you worked with a specific AP provider, all of their development focuses on building an incredible AP process and making it super, super efficient. Whereas, with a suite, you do have that spread of focus. And so the reality is, and though, you'd hope that they build up their capacity because for the number of modules, the reality is that, your every module is competing for development capacity. So depending on their weaknesses and how they prioritize, you may have a slower lead up in terms of new features. The other thing as well is that because everything's in the same system, when you upgrade it, you actually have to upgrade everything at the same time. Now, some people may say, well, that's better because, it's one upgrade process. Brilliant. But if you have varying departments using the same system, you have lots of entities, or you're a global organization, managing that upgrade process can be challenging, because you've got users all over the place, all with different upgrade requirements, and you have to manage the UAT across all of it. So it's less of a con and more of a something to think about, but it is something to bear in mind. I guess the biggest con and the bit that I worry about is the fact that you can't necessarily add functionality into the different areas required. They tend to have one AP module, for instance, that they have, and what you get is what you get what you're given in that module. If your needs change, you have less flexibility around upgrading. Now, AP is probably the wrong example to use, but say your billing module, for instance. there's a lot of AP modules, which is great, are actually building integrations to different ERPs. So that's probably one area you do have flexibility, but you tend to have less options to up and downgrade as you go. And if you're doing that, you really need to look very closely at integration capabilities, because a lot of the integrations with the traditional ERPs tend to be Excel based, though I'm very pleased to see that more and more are becoming API based, which is where we need to go. I think from a strategy perspective, sometimes the challenge with this traditional ERP approach is that one area may outgrow the system before another. So finance may need more complexity before the rest of the business does, or vice versa. So what it doesn't give you is that ability to lift and shift the level of complexity and capability that you have in different areas, whereas you do have a bit more flexibility in the best of breed approach. And having worked in deployments across with CRMs, with finance systems, with wider business architecture, I don't think I've come across one company where everyone has chosen one particular product when selecting an ERP. So you have, trying to get a consensus across the wider business, something that works for everybody when you're in a complex, very agile company, can be challenging. So these are all the cons. And for some businesses, actually, some of these cons are actually pros. And I think it's important. So I probably should have some caveats around the words that I use, but it's things to think about. And if you feel like there's anything else we need to consider on this, chip in, guys. This is a community. We are always open to other thoughts and ideas. But there's some of the things that I think about. And now I will just say, right, I work with both. So I work with traditional ERP or suites. I work with best of breed approach platforms. So I very much, I don't have this is definitely the way to go piece. It does depend on the organization I'm working with and their requirements and their business strategy and, where they want to be in 5 years. But I think this is things that people don't think about. They think about what's the provider I want to work with, but they don't always think about what is the strategy we're taking with the system? How much flexibility do I need in the future? What am I willing to compromise? And, where's my budget sitting? And how do I maximize what I'm going for? So flip side, best of breed. So that, just to recap, that is where you have like a core finance system, but then you choose the functional capabilities and modules that you want to work with. So I think the piece is that, and the big benefit is that you have more flexibility to up and down the capabilities within different departments. So things like CRM. So rather than using the inbuilt CRM within your finance or your ERP, you would use something like Salesforce or HubSpot. So that's one example of moving away from that traditional ERP, because HubSpot doesn't have a finance system. It is purely CRM and marketing, so sales and marketing. So it's again, a lot of it depends on the tools that you want to use. You have the ability to scale capabilities up or down. So if your AP needs, a deep level of capability, or your projects does, maybe, your projects are a big part of your business and you need some really powerful capabilities in that area. The benefit of the best of breed approach is you could up that project capability, putting in a project management solution, for instance, but having all the financials flowing through to a core system. Generally, in their areas, those feature sets tend to be stronger. So anyone that, and you will know this in yourself, is that, there is real benefit to being a specialist in a particular area. You have a deep knowledge of your area, and the same is true for software. So where you get an AP software where all they do is AP, right, you will tend to have a deeper and more comprehensive AP capability than something that is sitting within a wider ERP, because they have more focus, they have more specialism, right? But the important thing, I guess, the con on that is that, and the piece you need to think about is, do I need that depth in that particular area? And if you don't, then you step away from that and go with a smaller package. And again, that's one of the nice things about best of breed is say now you need a very basic level of AP capability. You just go for the bog standard and the cheapest potential version and capability you could. But maybe in 5 years' time, once you've gone global and your volumes and your transactional capabilities up, you would then swap to a more powerful AP solution. And again, that best of breed gives you the flexibility without having to transition your core. And that's, again, things you need to think about. The downside of that is that it can be a more expensive approach, in terms of you're paying more because you've got more capabilities within certain areas. So you need to think about is that agility and flexibility and the scalability that brings me important enough that I'm willing to absorb the fact that I may need to pay more for the overall solution. Whereas, as we said, one of the pros of the suite and the traditional approach is it does generally tend to be more cost effective. And the other thing as well is, again, this is heavily caveat, but sometimes you may need to think about, am I dealing with an external provider? Partners such as ourselves sometimes, will contract with you and deal with the actual third party separately, so you have less to manage. But it's still something to bear in mind with non-supported partners or partners that don't have a contract agreement in place. Okay, so questions you should be asking yourself. So what level of system can I afford right now? Okay, and I think that's really, really important, is that you might want to take the best of breed approach because it's going to drive and give you that flexibility moving forwards, but your budget may not be in a place where that can be supported. So you might need to evaluate the more traditional ERP approach. But then you need to really think about is, if that's where I need to end up, how do I do things that I won't have to undo in a few years, right? Because nobody wants, especially with finance, you don't want to go through lots of system transitions. So sometimes I say, well, let's look at smaller entry points for a best of breed system so that you can swap it out later. I also think you need to consider, what is your business's appetite for change? If your business is fairly steady, it's got growth ambitions, but they're fairly conservative, you're not expecting your product, your locations, your business to change that much over the next 5 years, then actually, traditional may suit you better because you get more value for money, but the processes are, more standardized. And once it's in and it's not going to change. So you need less flexibility. So that's great. The other thing as well, with more suite options, you tend, and this is not always the case, but it's worth considering, is if you have specific processes that have to work in a certain way, you're better. And if you need any development or customization, you're better off doing that normally in a suite, because when you upgrade, obviously, you've got less to worry about in terms of testing. I also think it's important to think about, what systems do I already have in place? Now, when I speak to customers and they have Salesforce or they have HubSpot, they've got an AP platform, they've got an expenses platform, I go, actually, why would I try and shoehorn all of that into an ERP that's not going to deliver the same level of capabilities that you've already got? Actually, I'm better off just putting in a best of breed finance platform and then connecting it into the systems that you already use. So again, it's about thinking about where your business is at and what your strategy needs to be. How does the system need to scale? So again, thinking about volumes of transactions, but also capabilities. Where does my system need to be able to deliver over the next 3 to 5 years? Because if you're going to implement a system, you don't want to be shifting it out every couple of years. You really need to, especially with finance, because you have to manage historical data, all that kind of stuff. So worth thinking about it. We talked about business plans, and that in conjunction with the appetite to change, how willing are people to shift things up and down, is really important. And then, of course, as you scale, you need to think about complexity. So one of the real things that I'm a big believer in is that complexity is the enemy of automation. So the more time that you spend unraveling your complexity and making things as simple as possible, the more flexibility that you as a business have in what systems you use. Now, if you're not willing to address that, and I say willing, but if you're not able to address it because it's part of your uniqueness as a business, it's part of your USP, then you need to, understand that has an impact on what you can and can't do in your finance team. So yeah, so all good things to consider, and it's worth considering all of those elements when you're going in and looking at systems. Okay, and deciding whether you have a best of breed or a suite-based approach to your system architecture. And and regardless, I like to think in layers, especially when I'm going best of breed, right? So I think about like the core components that make up my day-to-day transaction and processing, which is normally AP, core finance, AR, and CRM. Now, AR can be a billing engine. So SaaS might work with a couple of different billing engines, for instance, it's a really common one. Industries may have specific extensions to that. So manufacturing may have a stock management or work order processing capability. E-commerce will have a website. So there's lots of different elements. But think about what are the functional areas that I need to have in my system, and what solutions right there. Then I want you to think about the different layers that go on top of that. So one of the layers that we are working with a lot now is what I call the workflow or integration layer. It's officially known very often as a BPA layer, which is business process automation layer. But for me, it's about workflow, it's about integration. So, or automation layer, I've also reverted to it. If you ever hear me talk about any of those things, and that is basically a layer that automates the connection between systems, but also automates tasks that happen within systems. So I'll give you some examples of that in a little bit. Your data analytics layer. So that is, how do I pull data out of all of these systems that I'm working with, all of these modules that I'm working with? And then my forecasting layer. So data analytics is about looking back. So what is happening right now? Forecasting is what is happening in the future. And you could add planning into that as well if you wanted to. And again, guys, don't forget that please do add comments, add questions as we go through this. Always happy to answer. And if anything I'm saying isn't clear, whether you're listening to the podcast or listening to this on demand, send me a message. But if you're in live, you get the opportunity to just ask me there and then. So here's an example of a best of breed solution with the layers incorporated. So here I've got my core Sage Intacct solution, which is my best of breed finance. I've got my web expenses or certify expense solution. I've got YayPay for credit control. I've got Salesforce for CRM. I've got Tipalti for AP, and I've got my bespoke in-house PM system that we've built, right? And this is one of many variations that I work with over the years. But around that, I might add something like Workato, which is a business process and integration automation solution. So that connects and has connectors to lots of different systems. So it has a connector for Salesforce, has a connector for Sage, etc. And I'll be using that to trigger off alerts, updates, integrate different systems. And then around that, I might have my Power BI, which is my data analytics system of choice. Now, whether I would go for Power BI, given I've got those selection of modules, is a different story. But again, I can talk through, and again, the hard bit is figuring out which are the layers that you need specific to your department. But what you've got to think about is I need a data analytics layer at some point. And that at some point is super important. Okay, so we've talked about an example architecture. So let's dig into some of those layers. So what is a BPA or integration layer? So a BPA or integration layer helps automate the processing between systems, but also within systems. So a couple of the ones that we work with, Codeless, Saltbox, Power Automate, Data Blend, and Workato. They're just some examples of them, and I would recommend different ones depending on the requirement. And that's the hard thing is and it's something I spend a lot of time doing is digging into these systems and figuring out which is the right one to look at. But fundamentally, what they do is help connect systems. So if I've got say HubSpot and my finance system, Sage Intacct, it connects the dots and allows me to build a codeless or a workflow-based integration that could be adapted and customized. And I think there's a lot if anyone's been to any of my integration sessions, you will have heard me talk about different ways to integrate systems. And that's, again, one of the benefits of a BPA layer, is that you can use it for integration as well as automation. So if you need flexibility, or you're going to be changing or tweaking your system selection, having a look at this kind of layer is really valuable. Examples of uses of BPA, and it isn't just integration. That's normally where people start. They normally come with I need to connect the dots here because I'm spending a lot of time sharing data, but it can do so much more. So things like alerts when customer credit limits change, or their credit score changes. So things like that. When customer details, updating customer details in the finance system when the details change in CRM, updating stock levels on a website, sending customers copies of dispatch notes, alerting a project manager when your project is over budget, importing non-financial data into finance systems, maybe the number of FTEs from your HR system or payroll system. So, or alerts when supplier bank details change. And the bit that I found so powerful about BPA systems is that it is all about putting the triggers, the alerts, the integrations in the hands of your system administrators versus developers. Because normally, if you want this kind of capability, it either has to be built into the system, or you have to get a developer to write some code to do it. And I can absolutely, in 20 years' time, maybe we'll all, and finance will all be competent coders. The reality of the competence that we have right now is that we don't have that competence, and I don't necessarily think we need it. So with codeless apps, and we could talk about ChatGPT might be writing these workflows for us at some point, but we have the ability with a BPA layer to do like drag and drop workflows. So I'm going to drag in my Sage Intacct connector that says, if customer A equals this, when new order create, send email to account manager, right? And that's, but it's all, the idea behind a lot of these is that they are codeless, so they don't normally require development capabilities to use and build workflows. Now, that being said, as you look at your different platforms, they will have a different degree of complexity in building workflows. So that's one of the things I always suggest, again, when we're looking at different platforms, is you need to understand your capabilities as a business. And if we go on to my questions, so when you're selecting a platform, if you're going down this route, one, is it the right time? Because very often people get really excited about all of this automation and workflow capability, but their core systems aren't yet right. So I always say, get your core in, get it right, and then we start adding. In the BPA layer. So, and when you're selecting a BPA layer, you need to ask, right, what connectors do we have? And is there pre-built workflows available within the system that I can easily use? How easy is the system to build new workflows? So, i.e., am I going to need somebody with developer-like capabilities? Am I going to need to use an external consultant? Is it something that my internal super user can use? Do I need my IT or administrator team to do it? And again, these questions may differ depending on the size of organization that you are. Or can every finance user do that, right? So the first thing is, do I have the technical competence? The second question you need to ask yourself is, do we have the capacity to do that? So if we're going to invest in this platform, do we have the time in finance to actually maintain and develop the system, to add in some robust guidance and processes and procedures around how we add new alerts and triggers and competencies? Because that's, again, one thing you need to think about, is that you need to have some rigor around how you document and how you implement new automations, because otherwise they can end up clashing, right? So you need to think about the rigor behind how you approach. What connectors do I need now? So what does my system architecture landscape look like now? What will it look like in the future? What if I need a connector that's not already on the agreed list? What is that BPA connector's ability to build custom connectors, or willingness to build custom connectors? What is it going to cost me? How does the pricing scale as well? So very often it can be based on either volumes, the numbers of transactions that are going through, the numbers of workflows, the numbers of connectors. So what are What are the pricing caveats that I need to consider, and what will I need both now and in the future? And then how are we going to monitor, manage upgrades and testing, and basically put some controls around what we're doing with this BPA platform. Okay, so that was a lot of business process automation platforms in your BPA layer, as you can all now go away and talk about. Guys, if you've got any questions on that or specific areas that you want to sort of dig into, then please do pop it into the chat. Again, I am keeping an eye. There may be a slight delay in when questions come through, but I will make sure by the end of this session, I come back to all questions, either live or after the fact. So please keep them coming. It'd be great to know your thoughts. So how many of you have heard of a BPA layer and have actually used it? So please do pop in whether you've got one, whether you're thinking about one, and I'd love to know if anyone has never heard about it, because that's always useful information. Again, I think one of the challenges in finance is that technology is moving so very fast, and us keeping up with it is really challenging. And so like I said, spent a lot of time researching and looking at all the new and exciting toys that are out there. So yeah, this is my bread and butter, and I've been working with this stuff for years. But if you've not heard of it, don't be worried. Like it's not unusual. People don't even know some of this technology exists, or that they should even be thinking about it. Hence why we're doing these sessions. Okay, so what is a data analytics layer? So this is probably more widely known, and it's a reporting capability that sits on top of your overarching finance architecture. So some people will actually have a very good level of reporting capability within their core systems. I literally had this conversation with a Sage Intact customer. They were like, why do I need this additional reporting analytics capability? And based on the reporting requirements, no, they didn't. So that's where things get super interesting. So I think I actually think that the data analytics layer and the forecasting and planning layer normally should be one of the last layers you look at, right? And where it is appropriate is very much when you have systems that don't share information, or you have systems where you need to combine different data sets and push data in between systems, right? So that's where I really feel like a data analytics layer comes into play. So that's something to think about. Now, examples of data analytics layers. So we've got Focus, which is one that we're working with at the moment, really interesting product. Connects into Intact, so that's why we're looking at it, but it connects into a lot of different systems, so don't feel like you have to be on Intact to use it. Tableau is a really common one. We tend to, certainly those that are more advanced in their finance system architecture, tend to have either a Tableau or a Power BI is a common one. Power BI we do a lot of work with on 200, building out dashboards and things, so that's an area that's really interesting. And there's some other smaller platforms as well. So Pro Forecast is one we work a lot with, Sage 50 and the smaller 200 sites, particularly standard. So put that worth putting in there, but again, it connects to different ones, and Mosaic. So yeah, so some great things. Now, what's really interesting, guys, is I'm just going to take a pause on that, because we've actually had some great questions coming through the chat. So if I just pop back to the conversations around BPA. So what do I mean by connectors? So do you know what? This is great. Thank you so much for asking that question, because like anything, and when you're in this stuff day to day, some of this seems really obvious. So a connector for me is the end point that I'm connecting to. So for instance, when I'm choosing a BPA platform, ideally I want something that suits the level of abilities of the user, but also has pre-built, easy to use connectors for the systems that customer's already using. So for example, if they were using, say, Sage 200 as their core platform, I would look for a BPA platform like Codeless that has a pre-built connection to 200. And what it means is that when you build out the workflows, rather than having to write code to connect into 200 to pull it into Codeless, is that there is a pre-designed connector into that platform. So when I want to use it, I can drag and drop and use that connector. So if, like, for instance, Salesforce, so if I've got a pre-built connector from Salesforce, I might even have a pre-built recipe that allows me to go, right, pull the customers from CRM, Salesforce. Yeah, so my Salesforce connector will have a pre-built, give me a list of customers, and then, or a list of new customers, and then a second connector to my finance system, which will be go create those customers. Yeah, so a connector is the end point. So I would have a Salesforce connector, a Sage 200 or a Sage Intact connector, or a Sage 50 connector. Yeah. And it's basically the connection to the finance or the platform that I'm using. It may not be a finance related one. So great question. Thank you. Is the BPA something like Approval Max or Sahara? So I actually see Sahara as a AP automation solution. So if I go back to my diagram of the layers, I would see Sahara as my AP automation solution because it's specifically for a functional area. It is processing transactions. Now, my BPA layer may, if I needed it, take data out of Sahara and push that into my finance system. So it could be, you could use it for EDI. So for those that don't know what EDI is, it's electronic invoicing. So Sahara may connect into I may want Sahara to pull in price lists, say, from my suppliers. Now, if that functionality doesn't already exist in Sahara, I'm trying to remember because it's actually one where we work with. So I'm trying to remember. I don't think it has automatic syncs. So it may be I want to connect that as Sahara into my supplier's price list download, right? So I would use a BPA layer to go pull price lists from supplier website or from supplier portal, or import them from CSV and then push it into Sahara if there was a connector available for Sahara. Approval Max, I've heard that with one of our smaller customers, actually. I think it's very similar to, I think it is a BPA platform, but it's a smaller version of a BPA. So I can certainly dig into that and come back to you on that one. But yes, that's more of a BPA than Sahara. So Sahara would normally put in the AP automation capabilities piece versus a BPA or workflow integration layer. Okay, lovely. So guys, keep the questions going, really useful and great for me to help me understand where people's level of knowledge are. Because again, I want to make this valuable and I want to make this educational, and I don't want to use a terminology that doesn't mean things to people. So again, guys, if any of my comments or answers to your questions don't make sense, feel free to keep asking more. And or to message me directly if you don't want to put it in the chat. Like I do say to people, but that, I prefer it if it is live, because I think if you've got a question and you're thinking, I have no idea what Hannah's talking about, somebody else is probably listening to this and thinking exactly the same thing. So please do ask any questions, particularly around understanding. But equally, if you've got something specific to your setup that you're wanting to pick apart, then you know where I am on LinkedIn. Just DM me directly. Okay, so recap. So we talked about BPA layer, and if there are any other questions, keep those going, and I'll circle back at the end and pick those up. But let's talk about what is a data analytics layer. So a data analytics layer is that view is basically pulling the data from multiple systems and displaying it in reports. Now, depending on the data analytics layer and its capabilities, you may also need a data warehouse layer. And this is where people get a little bit scared, but basically a data warehouse is somewhere where you push data to and store it. It often involves some kind of cleaning up of that data if it's not in an easily accessible format or the hygiene's not great. But we are very much getting into enterprise and large system architecture. So I'm going to keep things simple and just focus on the tools. So you may want to consider at some point adding a data analytics layer. So questions you need to ask yourself when you're thinking about whether you need a data analytics layer is, do we have a data structure that supports the value of the data analytics layer? So for very small businesses, so what I mean by small businesses, so somebody that's on a lower level of finance capability, particularly, so something like the Zeros and the Sage 50, if you're at that point, I would definitely, you need to decide whether before you add a data analytics layer, you actually need to go up the scale, because the 50s and the zeros don't tend to have a data structure that supports really good wide reporting. So for instance, the nominal doesn't go down to customer or product level or project level. Yeah, it's very much a very basic data architecture. So whilst you will get some value out of a reporting layer, you want to look at the smaller size, so looking at something like Pro Forecast. But two, you might, even if you put a really powerful data analytics layer on top of your systems, you may not get the reporting out that you want, because your data structure underneath in your finance system doesn't give you the level of detail that you need. And that's always the balance, right? So people very often, even at a small end, want this amazing reporting, but the finance system doesn't have the architecture to support the level of detail that they need, right? So you need to evaluate, especially if you're a smaller business, what you do first. And I would always say, get your structures right, choose a next level up with a better reporting capability than you have now before you go to the more advanced mode of having a data analytics layer. Okay, because you can become unstuck doing that, and I've seen that. And there's nothing worse than having brilliant dashboards that look pretty, but the data isn't of the level that you need, and the drill down isn't there. Other questions you need to ask yourself. So maybe you've got a reasonable level of finance and data architecture, but you need to think about your data hygiene. So what I mean by that is, if you're connecting the dots between two different systems, i.e. Salesforce and your finance system, your CRM and your finance system, do you have a consistent way to connect that data? So do your customers in Salesforce have the same unique code as your customers in your finance system? If not, you need to get your data architecture and your data strategy right before you add on a data analytics layer, because otherwise, again, you'll be paying for something you can't get value out. So when you're choosing a data analytics layer, we talk about connectors, right? So, and again, we would choose the data analytics layer based on the capability and competence and systems strategy that company has chosen. But you need to think about, well, what if the data sets that I need to connect to, what if I need does that data analytics layer have a pre-built connector? So there's that word again. I'm sorry, just explain that. Does it have a pre-built connection to the system with an easy to pull down, a way to easily select the data that I want to draw down? And is it built broadly enough that I can pull all the data that I need into the data analytics platform? Or do I need to look at some kind of data architecture or data warehousing solution? You also need to think about is how wide the connector sources are in that data analytics layer. You need to look at what you might want in the future and try and pick something, if you're going to go down this route, that will connect to not just the systems you're using now, but the systems you're using in the future. And how easy is it for it to access connectors and to build connectors to systems that perhaps you don't know that you're going to be using yet? So you should always be thinking a few steps ahead. And I've used the term financial systems architecture or systems strategy, because it is about trying to be very forward thinking about how do I structure my financial systems in a way that builds agility, flexibility, and future proofs as much as possible for the business and the finance team. And one of the big questions, and I'll keep harping on this, but do you actually need it now? So a lot of people don't use the reporting capabilities that they have within their current system. And if that is you, then I would get to a point where you're using your current capabilities before you start adding in a data architecture, a data analytics layer, because there's and the next question is, do we have the technical competence and capacity to maintain and develop, especially when you get into the realms of things like Power BI or Tableau, you are going to need dedicated resource or dedicated capacity, whether that's part-time or full-time, to build out reports and capabilities. They need to have a good level of technical competence, because a lot of the data are, the data transformation steps, etc., do use some level of light coding to do, like M or etc. So you need to think very carefully about the levels of capability and competence before you add on things like a data analytics layer. Now, that being said, some systems do come with pre-built dashboards, and if that is your approach, it's a good one. Things like we do that often, like build a set of dashboards for people to consume. But at some point, I always say to people, you're going to need to build a capability to amend and develop those reports further. So you need to think about that longer term. You also, particularly when you're working cross systems, so we had a mention of Zahara and other platforms. When you're connecting your data analytics layer into lots of different platforms, one thing to think about is, have you defined your data dictionary? So, like, what does this data structure mean? So what does the definition of an account number, how is that used across your different systems and your different data sets? And just thinking about defining that. Now, I am getting into what I would call mid-size finance system architecture. As a very small business, you may not need, if you've got one connector or two connectors, you may not need a data dictionary. But then the question is do you need a data analytics layer, or do you just need some pre-built dashboards that connect into your current system? Okay, so as you go up the scale of complexity and capability that you need in terms of data and reporting, you need to start asking these questions. Okay, so again, floor's open, guys. Does anyone have any questions around data? Maybe there's some follow-up questions around BPA and the platform. Happy to answer those as we go through. Then just ask. And then the next layer that you might want to consider is a forecasting. And this is, I would say it's a fairly new layer, but it's been around in the enterprise world for a long time. And again, like all things, as it starts to come down the track. So a forecasting layer is about anticipation, about planning, about thinking ahead of where you're going to be versus reporting on what has already happened. And so thinking about, some reporting capabilities, so you'll see some familiar names. So some modules actually have a forecasting capability built in. So that's why I've sort of, it can be seen as separate, but or combined. It can be seen as combined, but I tend to think of it separately. And then the platform I would use would be based on what they're already using. So things like we've got Sage, Sage Intacct budgeting and planning, and that actually can be used standalone. So I'll often have a look at that. For anyone that's used sort of Win Forecast in the past, that's kind of how I think of it. Win Forecast in the cloud with some great scenario planning capabilities. So if anyone's interested in having a chat about that, feel free to reach out. Profix is, I love, for bigger organizations. So where people have lots of different systems they need to connect in, they need some really complex and powerful capabilities. Profix, brilliant for that. Focus and Pro Forecast, they both so Focus has a forecasting module. Pro Forecast very much helps you do things like modeling. So again, it's got pre-built models that you can turn on. So it's basically, it's getting into the forward-thinking layers of forecasting versus the reporting aspect, which is the data analytics layer. And I'd be interested to see how many people actually have forecasting. So what always amazes me is how many people have this all in Excel spreadsheets that gets manually done. And I think especially in the very variable and, we talk about, the VUCA. So the very volatile environment we are at the moment, where things are constantly changing and, things need to adjust. Sometimes Excel just isn't there. Yeah. And again, I have gone into sites where they've gone too far ahead. So one of the things you need to think about is, what is the level of skill we need for this particular forecasting platform? And it might be have all of the capability you could ever want, but it might be too complex for your organization. There is a danger sometimes that you kind of go for where you wish you were versus what you need right now. And sometimes having a simpler forecasting module is and embedding the principles of doing forecasting in a system, and getting that rigor involved, is better than going whole hog for really complex and powerful systems. So you need to think about what level of skill do we need to maintain that particular platform, and what level of platform do we need. You do need to think about, ask the same questions, is that if you're going to do that, you need to have the cost of the capacity to do this. The one thing about spreadsheets that we always say is that spreadsheets are easy to build and maintain, and every user knows how to use them. The challenge is that there's no controls around what people are doing with them, and they're easy for them to go wrong. So again, you need to just invest the time in learning and embedding your whatever platform you use into the piece. And yeah, I know that's why I got so excited when we've got Sage Intacct planning over in the UK, because I was asked constantly for a replacement for Wind Forecast. So yeah, so that's currently the main one that we are looking at. But there are others, and we're exploring all of the different options. And there's others, not just the ones on the slide that I shown. So there's lots of things to think about. Do you need it now? So if you haven't got the time to, if your month end isn't closing quickly, it takes you forever to get your reporting out and it's still on in spreadsheets, personally, I wouldn't have your forecasting layer as your focus, because and again, you're probably in a position where, as much as you'd love to, you only really have time to go through a forecasting cycle once a year. And at that point, I'd say, right, let's get the basics sorted. Let's get your processes automated. Let's get your reporting streamlined and out of spreadsheets. And then we'll look at the forecasting layer on top. And again, you need to think about what connectors do you need, what data sources do you need to pull from, and what happens if your connector, that word's coming up, so it was great to have the definition at the beginning. What happens if I need a connector that's not on the list? Okay, team. So top tips. So think about integration and with your wider strategy before you purchase any platforms, whether that's your forecasting layer, your data analytics, your AP solution. Always have a process, your CRM. Don't just let one department go ahead and buy stuff without thinking about it aligned with your wider system strategy, okay? And I see this a lot. So people will have these disparate systems. Every department just picked what they want, but nobody's actually thought about how they're going to connect the dots. And they've not really thought through the end-to-end processes. And sales and finance is such a key part of that. And thanks, Soph. So Soph, if those of you that don't know, Soph is the producer for this series for Financial Transformation Live. She's putting all the links in the chat. So she's put in the previous session. So she's put in the Sage Intacct budgeting and planning solution as well. Understanding how things integrate and what data is available in each system, and having a strategy around that data architecture is really important. So important. I'm going to do another one of these sessions just on that. So please do join me on that one. Think about upgrades and changes to processes. So if sales change their pipeline process, how does that impact finance? What does that mean? So really thinking across the business, how processes, systems, and data combine is really important. Think about how you're going to upgrade your different levels. So we talked about the functional layer, so with the AP and the AR. So does that auto upgrade also work with any integration platforms that you have? do build in flexibility and agility. So one of the things that is very exciting about finance and finance technology, particularly at the moment, is that it's changing really rapidly. So there's new capabilities coming out in existing systems, there's new systems and plugins that we can continue to develop. So I'm a big believer in that right now, one of the big questions you should be asking is about agility. How easy is it to flex and customize my systems to plug different things in? Unless you, like I said, you have some really some really strong business logic that means that you cannot change your systems once they're in. Make sure that you've understood your reporting requirements, your processes, and your data capability, your data structure and hygiene before implementing the more advanced layers. Because it's not that you can't implement the layers, it's that when you will go to do it, and then you will have to fix things before you actually start integrating all of the cool automations and integrations. So really get hold of the basics before you start going more advanced. And it's hard, right? Because your board, your management team are probably crying out for better data, more reporting, and actually that's where you just need to invest the time to shift your core systems now as quickly as you can, so that you then can plug in these more advanced layers. There is no point. It's a bit like putting rocket fuel into a Ford Fiesta, right? It's not going to go well, it's probably not going to go any faster. It might actually slow it down. But you put rocket fuel into a rocket, and oh my God, you're reaching the stars. So there is a bit about just make sure that you're doing things in the right order and manage your stakeholders effectively before, as you do this, and set expectations across the business before you jump in and leap to some of the more advanced capabilities. And I guess my other thing is that all of this is, I'm trying to give you very generalist advice and things to think about, but you will know your business and you will know your finance team, you will know your current processes and your current systems. So please do take all of the things that I've told you into context with your current system architecture, with your business and your plans. And what I'm saying, and general advice, may not be generally specific to you, and so just bear that in mind, in that there are lots of dependencies and caveats around everything I'm saying. I'm just kind of trying to give everybody a bit of food for thought about what to think about as they go through. Now, I actually thought this was going to be a short session, but as usual, I have chatted for an hour. So I'm going to quickly get through some important updates for everybody. So I highlighted the value of data strategy. And as I was going through building this presentation, I said to the guys, right, we need to do a session just on that. So our next session is in August, on the 22nd at 11 a.m. It will be alive. It will be available on demand. And if you haven't already, if you want to get the alerts on when this is coming out, then please do sign up on our website to do that. Soph has very kindly put the links into that event. So if you want to watch it live, you can jump on the link there. If you want to get alerts when we release these, you can do it in a couple of ways. So firstly, you can follow us on LinkedIn. If you follow the company page, the alerts always come out there. If you sign up on our website, we have an alerts for financial transformation live specifically that you can get access to. I also have my CFO newsletter. I'm not sure if anyone knows that as part of the CFO piece, but we send out a monthly newsletter with all of the on-demand content that we've put together, and other things that I found that are useful across the internet as well. So that's our CFO 4.0 like monthly briefing, I call it. So it's interesting stuff that I've come across. I think, oh, that's cool. Like, let's send that out to the crew, and just useful content from us and our other partners that we work with as well. So today's session, hopefully we talked about the different options, best of breed versus ERP. We talked about the different layers that you need to have within your system and examples of the layers and options, but there are more. So I've just picked some common ones or some well-known ones. Please don't take this list as exhaustive, because there are so many out there. And I apologize to any one of the solutions that I've forgotten. There's probably something in there that I haven't mentioned yet. Please do, if you've got any remaining questions, anything in this that you wish you'd asked, not got round to, or for whatever reason didn't want to ask publicly, just DM me, send me a message on LinkedIn. And my email address is here for anyone who wants to message me directly. Happy to offer, to try and point people in the right direction. If we can help, great. If not, I will point you. We're lucky enough that we've got some great partners and people that I know in different areas that we might be able to point you in the direction of. So more great content. So integrating your finance systems. So that was a session I did a few months ago, but great session, really good if you're trying to get your systems to talk to each other. We talked about the 3 different options for integration and things you need to think about. So please do, if you're looking to integrate, definitely have a look at that. Sage database guide. So if you're looking, I'm putting together a few, basically a portfolio of data dictionaries for the Sage products. So if you're interested, then please do DM me and I will put you on the list for that. Automate your finance processes with Sage Intacct. So again, a lot of the products we work with, one of my favorite products to work with is Sage Intacct because it has such a powerful data architecture and process and analytics capability in one. So if you want to sort of dig into that, we've got a huge amount of content on our website. You can, of course, go and have a look, some on-demand demos. We can go in and sort of see it in action, and things like the Salesforce integration, etc. Anyway, so I'm trying not to talk products on these, but it's hard on a data architecture conversation. But it's been lovely having you all on this show, and thank you so much for watching. As I said, please do reach out to me if you've got any questions or queries. And of course, if I've missed anything, you've got any ideas for topics or feedback on any of the content, please do reach out. Thanks everyone for joining. It's been an absolute blast. And hope to see you on the next one next month. Thanks everyone. Bye now.